Building Unity projects with Jenkins, Part 5, setting up our Nexus artifact repository. Let's get started. Hello there, and welcome back to buildqueue. So in the previous video, we managed to build our project using Jenkins, and we sort of touched a little bit on storing artifacts, but let's set up an actual artifact repository instead of storing things on Jenkins. So in this video, we're going to be doing just that. We're going to be installing Nexus, and then we're going to be updating our build pipeline so it publishes our artifacts to Nexus. So I actually changed my strategy for this one a little bit. I initially wanted to install Docker, and I wanted to run the service within a Docker container, but I figured that's probably not completely accessible to everyone that's looking at this course, because I know that people may have issues getting Docker to run on their PC. So I may have separate video series about Docker and Kubernetes and things of that sort. But for now, we're just going to install on Windows. It's going to be the easiest for everybody that's taking this course. And the main focus isn't necessarily on artifact repository for this course. It's more we just want to get the build pipeline working correctly. I'm going to have my service running on the same PC that I have Jenkins running on. So I went ahead and connected using remote desktop, open up the browser. I went ahead and typed in Sonatype Nexus download Windows. Go ahead and press enter. I'm going to full screen it. Ignoring the sponsored at the top, I'm going to download. Scroll down just a little bit. There's a Windows archive here. Go ahead and download the zip file. It may take a minute for it to download everything. The download finished, so I opened up File Explorer, found the directory. It's just in my downloads. Going to right click this. I'm going to extract all, extract here. This is fine. Once again, it'll take a little bit. It's done extracting, so go ahead and open up Nexus and go ahead and open up bin, and we have our nexus.exe here. Now we can't just double click and run this to run our service. We need to pass in a few arguments, so we're going to need to open up a command prompt. And since we're going to be running this as a service, go ahead and open your command prompt as administrator. In order to do this, go to the lower left hand corner, type in command prompt, right click, run as administrator, select yes. Now, whenever this opens, come back to File Explorer, go ahead and copy the path here, go back to command prompt, type in cd, beginning quote, paste in the path, end quote, and now we're inside of this directory. Now let's go ahead and create the service itself. So I went ahead and made the text a little bit bigger just in case it was a little bit hard to see. It was pretty small before. So you're going to type in nexus.exe, which references the executable file that's in our directory. Type in space /install, and then we're going to name the service Nexus. So after you type in Nexus, press enter, and the service has been installed, but it's not quite running yet. And that's the next thing that we're going to handle. In order to do this, type the up arrow key, change install to start, and then press enter again. And now it's starting our service. It may take a little bit before everything actually gets running. It's initializing a database and it's running the service itself, so just be a little bit patient. And just a heads up, this is going to be running on port 8081. That is what it by default runs on. After a little bit of time has passed, open up your browser again, open up a new tab, type in localhost 8081, and our service is running. So try not to get overwhelmed by this body of text here. Basically, it's just going over the latest releases and is showing off some of the newer features. So let's go ahead and sign in real quick. In the upper right hand corner, select sign in. For username, go ahead and type in admin. After you've typed in admin, go ahead and copy this path here. We're going to be signing in with the admin user, and it has a temporary password that we're going to be using. So copy this right here. Don't actually copy in the last part, just the path, not the actual file name. Open a File Explorer again, paste in the path. Here's our admin password file. Right click, edit in Notepad, copy this password, come back over to Nexus, paste this password in, and we're in as the admin user. Go ahead and select next. Go ahead and specify a password. I just put in admin, so I'm just going to log in with admin. Select next. Let's be a little bit responsible with this. We're going to disable anonymous access. Select next and select finish. So what do we want to do first here? The first thing that I think I'm going to do for this is I want to at least have my own personal user instead of just using an admin account. So in order to do so, since I'm logged in as the admin, I'm going to select this cogwheel right here. This takes us to the server administration configuration panel. Let's go ahead and navigate navigate to the users panel. So right now we have an admin user and then we have an anonymous user. I don't want to really log in with these, so let's create a local user. So these are all the fields that we need to fill out in order to create a new user. However, the thing that's going to be important right here is the roles. If you take a look at the bottom, there's the roles section here. This will specify all the permissions that you grant to the user. So you need to be careful with what permissions you give to any individual user. We can do a deeper dive on setting permissions and privileges per role. However, just for the sake of this, I'm going to give my user admin control so I can just do whatever I want freely. I'll probably make another guide in the future going over how to set up users and roles and permissions responsibly. I went ahead and filled out this form with all of my information. The next thing I want to do is I want to select the role. So I highlight NX admin, click this arrow over here, and then create local user. And my username is going to be buildqueue. That's what I'm going to use to sign in with. Then for my password, I just kept it as admin still. After you select create user, you can see your user here. So let's go ahead and sign in as that user. So I'm going to sign out of admin. I'm going to select sign in again. I'm going to type in my information again, select sign in, and now I'm signed in as buildqueue. So we've already created the user. What's going to be next? So the next thing that I like to do is I would like to go ahead and create the repository that's going to hold our artifacts. So in order to do so, at the very top, you're going to select server administration and configuration panel again. We can access this since we have admin privileges. Under repository, select repositories. Here are some repositories that are here by default and some groups. Don't worry about those too much. Go ahead and select create repository. So we have a lot of different things here to choose from. Which one is it that we need to use? So we are going to be using raw hosted, and you'll see this a lot here. You see hosted, group, and proxy. We're not going to use any proxies, and we may not use any groups either. But basically, if we had a project that had a Unity project and it also had a web server, you would want to keep those in different groups, but you want them to be grouped together. You would create a raw group, and then you would specify all the repositories that live within that group. But for now, we're just worrying about one repository at a time, and our zip file that we have our Unity project in doesn't really fall under any of these other categories. We are using their generic raw type here. Go ahead and select raw hosted, and then go ahead and give a name to your repository. I just use Jenkins Unity test. I'm going to be putting each platform within this repository. If you want, you can have them separated out into their own individual repositories, but I'm still going to keep separation in here. We'll get to that a little later on whenever we put together build pipelines for other platforms. So before we create the repository, let's go ahead and go over some of these fields here. So for storage, blob store, we're using the default blob store that's already created whenever we set this up. We can create separate ones though if you want to back up. For instance, let's say you have multiple projects, you don't want them living in the same space. Well, you can separate it out and you can create another blob store. To create another blob store, you would use the blob stores tab on the left here, but we're not going to worry about that. Default is fine for what we need. Cleanup policy, if you want to discard your builds after a certain amount of time, you can do so. Again, over on the left hand side, you can find cleanup policies. So let's go ahead and create the repository. Okay, and it has been set up. So how do we view the contents of this repository that we just set up? Because ultimately we want to be able to retrieve our artifacts from it. In the upper left hand corner, you're going to select browse server contents. On the left hand side, you'll select browse. This will show all of the repositories that we have. You're going to select Jenkins Unity test, and there's currently nothing in here, so it's empty. Now don't use this upload component. You can manually upload content here, but that's not going to be good practice. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to modify our build pipeline so it pushes to this location. Just to stay consistent, before we modify our build pipeline, I want to do the same thing that we did whenever we were testing out building our Unity project from command line. So I want to be able to push to our artifact repository from command line. So I went ahead and opened up downloads. This has our Nexus installation that we just ran. We have the zip file here, and I want to be able to push this zip file to our artifact repository from command line. So within here, right click, select git bash here. For the command, it's going to be curl base -u, u for username. I'm going to type out my username, type in colon, type your password afterwards. My password was just admin, space dash upload dash file. You can start typing out Nexus and then press tab and it'll finish it for you, but make sure that you put .zip at the end of it too. After specifying the file, we want to specify the path. We want to specify the URL. This will start with HTTP, not HTTPS, :/localhost:8081/repository/ and we want to type in the name of our Nexus repository. Mine was Jenkins_Unity_test, and just to put in an extra folder, I'm going to put in test just to show you guys what it looks like. And then you're going to want to name your artifact. I'm just going to name it nexus.zip. After this, you can test it out by pressing enter. Now this was a decent sized file, so it may take it a little bit. Now let's go ahead and refresh. In the upper right hand corner, you can select refresh. And as you can see, here's our test folder. And here's nexus.zip. If we click on nexus.zip, we could delete the asset. There's a path here, and this is where we can retrieve this. We just click on this and it starts downloading. And there's just a lot of extra metadata over here within the summary, which is pretty neat. Like you can check the file size, you can check whenever it was uploaded. It's all pretty nice. Now this was just for a test, so I don't really want this. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this asset. And whenever you delete the asset, if there's nothing left in the folder, it deletes the folder along with it, so you don't have to manually delete the folder. So I'm back over on my workstation, and I'm going to navigate to Jenkins because there's something that I want to do before I modify my Jenkins file. So I'm going to buildqueue.jenkins.com to reach my Jenkins service. I am logging in. I'm going to go down to manage. I'm going to go to credentials. I'm going to select global and add credentials. For kind, you're going to want to select secret text. The secret is just the password. Mine was admin. For ID, I just put Nexus password, and for the description, I said this is the password for the buildqueue Nexus user account. The reason why I created this is I don't want to expose my passwords for my user account within my build pipeline. I just want to be able to inject these and keep them hidden. You'll want to go ahead and select create. You'll then want to navigate to VS Code. You'll want to make sure that your Jenkins file is open. And the next thing we're going to do is modify the deploy window stage. So we are going to add in another environment variable. So below project path, you will want to create a variable called Nexus password, and it's going to be set equal to credentials Nexus password. And this is the secret text that we stored in the credentials area of Jenkins. Scroll down to deploy windows, and we're going to set this up a lot like how we have the build windows. Inside of the steps block, you're going to put in script. The next thing that we want to do before we go ahead and put in the command line argument is we want to find out what we want to name our artifacts. In a good format that I can think of is we want to incorporate the date and the platform in the very least. So what I decided to do to go ahead and set up the date is I went ahead and created this variable here. It's called build date, and the format of it, it's going to show the year, the month, the day, underscore, the hour, and then the minutes. And the reason why I want to show the time of the day is because you can churn out multiple builds per day, and you want each of them to be unique. You don't want them to have the same exact name. And now that we have the date, we want to go ahead and create an environment variable within this, and I called it artifact name, and it's going to be set equal to windows underscore build underscore the build date that we just specified up above, and then end it with .zip. So we have everything that we need to go ahead and create the artifact name. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to put together another bat block just like the one that we used in the build window section. An important thing about this is we want to use these single quotes here instead of double quotes because we are using credentials here in this, and if we use double quotes, Jenkins will tell us that our password or secret has been compromised and it has shown up in the logs, even though it doesn't actually show up in the logs. But using single quotes will ensure that that doesn't happen at all, and there's no risk of exposing our credentials. That was just my experience personally, though. Maybe it does actually expose. So make sure you use these single quotes. Now let's go ahead and start putting together our command. It's going to look very similar to what we had on the server. So go ahead and type in curl space -u. You'll want to type in your username. You can also store this as a variable up at the top if you want. Colon, type in Nexus password, all caps, inside of the percentage symbols, space dash dash upload dash file, space, and then a reference to our project path variable. I'm just going to scroll up to this real quick. I just wanted to make sure that I had the project name inside of it too, /builds /windows.zip. And then we are going to set the destination here. So just to be safe, I'm going to put in the static IP for my server. even though these services run on the same server. So it'd be fine if I use localhost, but I don't want to use localhost for this. So my IP that I'm using is 192.168.1.200. Specify the port 8081/repository. We'll want to put in our repository name. For mine, I put in Jenkins_Unity_test. I am going to specifically call these Windows builds. This is how I'm going to keep it separate from other platforms. / and then I'm going to reference our artifact name environment variable. So inside of %, artifact name. I'm going to go ahead and save. So this should be everything that we need to get this to work properly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm obviously going to push my work to my repository. I'm going to do it a little bit differently today. So I'm going to type in git GUI from git bash, and git bash is within my projects directory. I see my file here. I'm going to select this piece of paper to the left of it. This will stage it. You'll want to type in a commit message. I typed in the build pipeline. Will now attempt to deploy artifacts to Nexus. You're going to select commit. Your file has committed. Go ahead and select push. Origin dev is specified. That's fine. Go ahead and press push, and the push was successful. So let's go ahead and go back over to Jenkins and run our job. I'm still on this screen, so I'm going to select dashboard, Windows Unity project, build with parameters. This time I'm going to check deploy Windows, and then I'm going to select build, and let's see what happens. After waiting a couple minutes, I see that everything is done now, and I don't see a failure. And one good thing that I like about this is Nexus is rather fast, although the services are running on the same PC, so it probably doesn't take too much for it to transfer the files. So let's go check Nexus now. I'm going to log into it from my workstation. So I use my IP followed by 8081. This brings me here. I need to log in, put my credentials in, select sign in. On the left hand side, go to browse, and let's see if it's here. So I'm going to select Jenkins_Unity test, and our Windows build is here, and it's inside the Windows builds directory, and it is appropriately named and timestamped. So that's perfect. This is exactly what we're looking for. And ignore the fact that I'm doing this at 2 in the morning. This series isn't going to finish itself. So now all of our builds are available to anyone that has a Nexus account here. So if you had user accounts for other developers, for your QA team, for management, then as long as they had the correct permissions, they will be able to fetch these resources. Well, if you were here just for the Windows portion of this course, thank you so much for sticking this out with me. You can now build your Unity project using Jenkins, and then you can deploy the artifacts to an artifact repository. If you plan on sticking around for the rest of this course where we go over the other platforms, I'm just going to go ahead and give you a general roadmap so you know what to expect. So the next one that we're going to go over is going to be WebGL. I think it's going to be the easiest one next to Windows. So we'll go ahead and knock that one out. That one will be completed within one part, and then we'll move on to Android. I will try to complete Android all in one part too. And finally, we will end off with iOS. iOS is going to have to be at a minimum 2 parts. We will have to install another Jenkins agent on a Mac Mini, so you will have to have a Mac device. So I apologize if the last part is going to be a little bit gatekept by the hardware. It's not my decision. That was all Apple. Once again, thank you guys for joining me, and I will see you in part 6.